I still remember the exact shade of red that colored my cheeks that night. Not the warm blush of love or the gentle flush of embarrassment, but the burning crimson of humiliation. The kind that sears itself into your memory, tattooing the moment onto your soul. That night changed everything. The night my boyfriend of 3 years, the man I thought I'd marry, destroyed not just my artwork, but my entire sense of self with nothing more than a laugh and a few casual words. "Seriously, Olivia? This is what you've been working on for months. It looks like something a child would make." Even now, 2 years later, I can still hear the dismissive tone in Marcus's voice, still feel the weight of his judgment as he gestured at my canvas. I had spent 6 months on that painting, a surrealist interpretation of grief after my grandmother's passing. Hours of tears, memories, and healing poured onto that canvas. It wasn't just art, it was my heart exposed. But to Marcus it was a joke. That night was supposed to be special. I had finally gathered the courage to show him my most personal work, the piece I was considering submitting to a local gallery's Emerging Artist Showcase. I had prepared his favorite dinner, opened a bottle of wine, and carefully unveiled my canvas after dessert. I remember how my hands trembled slightly as I pulled away the cloth covering it, how vulnerable I felt exposing this piece of myself. The silence that followed should have been my first warning, but I mistook it for awe, for the speechlessness that sometimes accompanies profound emotion, until he started laughing. It wasn't even a mean-spirited laugh at first, just a small chuckle that grew into something more substantial, as if he was witnessing something absurdly amusing rather than a piece of my soul. "You're not seriously thinking of submitting this, are you?" he asked, wine glass dangling carelessly between his fingers. His eyes, the hazel eyes I once thought held the universe, narrowed slightly as they scanned my canvas. "I mean, no offense, Liv, but this isn't good. The proportions are all wrong, and what's with these colors? It's amateur hour." I stood frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape the humiliation I was enduring. Words abandoned me. All I could manage was a weak, I thought it captured how I felt about Gran. "Babe," he said with that condescending softness he reserved for when he thought I was being particularly naive, "this isn't going to get you anywhere. Art is about skill and talent, not just feelings." He took a sip of his wine, completely oblivious to how each word was cutting me open. "Maybe stick to your accounting job. Not everyone is meant to be an artist." The worst part wasn't what he said, though that was devastating enough. It was how casually he dismissed it all, moving on to talk about his promotion at the advertising firm, as if he hadn't just trampled my dreams under his designer shoes. As if the hours I spent in my tiny makeshift studio space didn't matter. As if I didn't matter. I didn't cry that night, not in front of him. I simply nodded, cleared the dishes, and excused myself to shower. Only when the water was running hot enough to turn my skin pink did I finally allow the tears to come, mixing with the shower spray, until I couldn't tell where my grief ended and the water began. That night, something shifted inside me, a subtle but definitive crack in the foundation of us. I went to bed beside him as usual, turned away from his sleeping form, and stared at the wall until dawn painted it with pale light. By morning, I had made a decision that would alter the course of my life. I wouldn't give up art. I would become so undeniably good that even Marcus couldn't dismiss me. I just didn't know then that my journey toward artistic validation would evolve into something much darker, much more satisfying than simple success. Because revenge, I would learn, is an art form all its own. The 2 weeks following what I now call the mockery night passed in a strange fog of normalcy and silent rage. On the surface, nothing changed between Marcus and me. We still shared breakfast each morning in our stylish downtown apartment, still kissed goodbye before heading to our respective jobs, still texted throughout the day with mundane updates and inside jokes. But beneath that veneer of normalcy, I was changing. Every morning as I applied my makeup, I stared at my reflection and wondered who the woman looking back at me had become. When had I started to shrink myself to fit into the spaces Marcus deemed appropriate for me? When had I begun to see myself through his eyes rather than my own? My job as an accountant at Henderson & Price was never my passion, merely a practical choice after college that paid the bills and satisfied my parents' definition of success. Marcus had always approved of it, a real career. He called it, unlike my hobby, of painting. Now, sitting at my desk processing accounts receivable, I felt like I was suffocating, drowning in spreadsheets and client invoices while my true self screamed for air. "You seem distracted today." My coworker Jen commented over lunch in the break room. Everything okay with you and Marcus? I forced a smile, picking at my salad. Everything's perfect. He's up for another promotion. That's great, Jen exclaimed, her enthusiasm genuine. Everyone loved Marcus. Charming, successful Marcus with his perfect smile and networking skills. You two are such a power couple. I nodded, wondering if power couples were supposed to feel this hollowed out, this diminished. That evening, instead of going straight home, I found myself wandering into an art supply store several blocks from our apartment. I hadn't stepped foot in one since moving in with Marcus 8 months ago. My supplies at home had dwindled, and I'd been too busy, or perhaps too intimidated, to replenish them. The bell above the door chimed softly as I entered, and immediately the smell of paint, paper, and possibility enveloped me. I moved through the aisles slowly, fingertips trailing over tubes of oil paint, bristles of brushes, edges of canvases. Each item seemed to whisper to me, reminding me of who I used to be. "Can I help you find anything?" A young man with paint-spattered jeans and a kind smile approached me. "I'm just looking," I said automatically, then paused. "Actually, I need everything. To restart." He nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Beginning again. That's brave." Was it? It didn't feel brave. It felt desperate, necessary, like gasping for air after being underwater too long. I left the store with more supplies than I could comfortably carry: a large canvas, premium paints, new brushes, palette knives, and a book on contemporary art techniques. The total had made me wince, but I used my personal credit card, the one Marcus didn't have access to. This was for me, not us. When I arrived home, Marcus was already there, laptop open on our dining table as he worked on a client presentation. "Hey, babe," he said, barely glancing up. "I ordered Thai. Should be here in 20. "Great, thanks." I tried to shuffle past him with my bags, but the awkward bulk of the canvas caught his attention. "What's all that?" he asked, finally looking at me properly. I hesitated. "Just some art supplies." His expression shifted subtly, not quite dismissive, but something adjacent to it. "I thought you'd given that up. Didn't you say you were too busy with work?" I had never said that. He had, repeatedly, until I'd stopped mentioning my desire to paint. "I'm making time," I said, surprised by the firmness in my voice. "I need this, Marcus." He shrugged, returning to his laptop. "Whatever makes you happy, Liv. Just don't go spending too much on it. We're saving for that Cabo trip, remember?" The Cabo trip he wanted. The Cabo trip his colleagues and their partners were taking. The Cabo trip I'd agreed to because saying no to Marcus always felt like setting off a small bomb in our relationship. "It's my personal money," I said quietly. He made a non-committal sound that somehow contained more judgment than his words ever could. I carried my supplies into our guest bedroom, the room that was supposed to be my studio when we moved in, but had gradually become a storage space for Marcus's sports equipment and the overflow from his expansive wardrobe. I cleared a corner, set up my canvas on the old easel I excavated from the closet, and arranged my new paints on the small desk by the window. It wasn't much, but it was mine. A small act of rebellion. That night, after Marcus fell asleep, I slipped out of our bed and into my reclaimed studio space. I stood before the blank canvas, brush in hand, and felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. What if Marcus was right? What if I had no talent, no future in art? What if this was all a waste of time and money? Then I thought of my grandmother, Gran with her gnarled, arthritic hands that never stopped creating, Gran who taught me to see beauty in unexpected places, Gran who believed in me without reservation or condition. "Art isn't about what others think, little spark," she used to tell me. "It's about what happens inside you when you create it." I dipped my brush into rich crimson paint, the exact shade of my humiliation that night, and made the first stroke across the canvas. And just like that, something broke open inside me. I painted until dawn streaked the sky, lost in the flow of creation, in the expression of everything I'd been suppressing. When I finally stepped back, exhausted but somehow more alive than I'd felt in months, I looked at what I'd created. It wasn't beautiful in any conventional sense. It was raw, angry, honest, a swirl of dark reds and blacks with slashes of white cutting through the darkness like desperate hope. It wasn't technically perfect, but it was real. It was me. I slipped back into bed just as Marcus's alarm went off. He rolled over, kissed my forehead, and mumbled, "You're cold." "Were you in the bathroom?" "Yeah," I lied, the first of many lies to come. "Couldn't sleep." "Poor baby," he said, already reaching for his phone to check his emails. "Maybe cut back on the caffeine." I closed my eyes, not letting him see the truth that was surely written there. Something had begun that couldn't be stopped. A metamorphosis. A plan taking shape without my conscious direction. I didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time in years, I was following my own compass rather than his map. "You've been distant lately," Marcus commented over dinner a week later. We were at Vesuvio, the upscale Italian restaurant he preferred for our date nights, where the lighting was dim enough to be flattering, but bright enough to be seen by the right people. "Is everything okay at work?" I twirled pasta around my fork, considering my response. The truth was, I had been distant. Physically present but mentally elsewhere, plotting, painting, planning in the early morning hours while he slept. The guest room now housed 3 new canvases, each more confident than the last, each fueled by the growing realization that Marcus's opinion had become increasingly irrelevant to me. "Work is fine," I said, offering a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "I've just been thinking a lot lately." He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. His touch, once electric, now felt merely familiar. "About what?" "My future. What I want." A flicker of concern crossed his face. "Our future, you mean?" It was telling that he immediately redirected my individual aspiration back to the collective. Marcus had always viewed us as an extension of himself, his girlfriend, his future, his plans. "Yes," I lied again, squeezing his hand before withdrawing mine to reach for my wine. "Of course." He seemed satisfied with this, launching into a detailed account of his latest project and how his boss had singled him out for praise during the client presentation. I nodded at appropriate intervals, making affirming sounds while my mind wandered back to my secret painting sessions. "By the way," he said as dessert arrived, "remember Allison from my office? The one who's married to the gallery owner?" My attention snapped back to him. "Yes? They're having a showing next Friday for some up-and-coming artist. Richard thinks it would be good for me to show face, network a bit. The client we're pitching to next month is apparently very into the arts." The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus, who had dismissed my art so casually, was now planning to use an art event as a networking opportunity. "Sounds interesting," I said neutrally. "So you'll come? Wear that black dress I like, the one that shows off your shoulders." It wasn't really a question. These events are all about making the right impression. I thought of the paint-stained pajamas I wore during my secret sessions, how alive I felt in them compared to the carefully selected outfits Marcus preferred me in. "Sure," I agreed, already thinking about the gallery, wondering what kind of work they showcased, who they represented. Later that night, as Marcus slept beside me, I slipped out of bed and padded to my makeshift studio. Instead of painting, I opened my laptop and researched Cameron Richards' gallery, the very place Marcus was taking me for his networking opportunity. The gallery specialized in contemporary art with an emphasis on emerging voices. Their website showcased previous exhibitions featuring bold, unconventional work that challenged traditional aesthetics. The current featured artist, Eliza Chen, created massive abstract sculptures that seemed to defy gravity. I scrolled through their submission guidelines, my heart racing. They accepted portfolio reviews for unrepresented artists twice a year. The next review period was in 4 months. Could I? Would I dare? I glanced at the canvases leaning against the wall, my midnight creations born of hurt and determination. They weren't ready. I wasn't ready. But in 4 months? Maybe. I continued researching until I found local art classes, workshops, critique groups, anything that might help me improve quickly. One listing caught my eye: Intensive Studio Workshop with Rafael Diaz, 8 weeks to transform your art. Rafael Diaz was a respected painter whose work I'd admired in college, before practical concerns and Marcus's subtle discouragements had led me away from pursuing art seriously. The workshop was expensive, $2,800 for 8 weekends of intensive training, and would require commitment every Saturday and Sunday from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. starting in 2 weeks. It would mean lying to Marcus, rearranging my life, using a significant chunk of my savings. But it might also be exactly what I needed. Before I could talk myself out of it, I entered my credit card information and registered. The confirmation email arrived seconds later. "Welcome to Transformative Studio Practice with Rafael Diaz." I closed my laptop, heart pounding with equal parts terror and excitement. I had just taken the first concrete step towards something, though whether it was artistic growth or the unraveling of my relationship, I wasn't yet sure. A weekend conference for accounting professionals? Marcus repeated, looking up from his phone as I casually mentioned my cover story for the workshop over breakfast the following Saturday. That sounds boring as hell, even for accounting. I shrugged, keeping my expression neutral. It's specialized training in new tax codes and reporting standards. Could help with a promotion. This immediate mention of career advancement was calculated. Marcus responded well to ambition when it aligned with conventional success metrics. A higher position, a better salary, the external validation of promotion. These were currencies he understood. Smart thinking, babe. He nodded approvingly. When is it? It starts next weekend. 8 consecutive weekends, actually. It's pretty intensive. He frowned slightly. Every weekend for 2 months? That's going to cut into our plans. What plans? I asked, genuinely unsure what he was referring to. Well, the Sullivans invited us to their lake house. And there's that charity golf tournament my firm sponsors. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. You know how important these social connections are for my career. There it was, the expectation that my time, my development, my existence was secondary to his networking opportunities. Once, I would have immediately backtracked, found a way to accommodate his needs while sacrificing my own. Not today. I've already paid for it, Marcus. It's non-refundable. I kept my tone matter of fact. You should still go to those events. I'm sure everyone will understand I have work obligations. He studied me for a moment, perhaps sensing something different in my demeanor. I guess it'll be good for your career, he finally conceded, though his tone suggested I was being mildly inconsiderate. Just make sure you're back for the Harrington wedding in June. I've already RSV'd for both of us. Of course, I agreed, relief washing over me. The lie had worked. I had carved out 16 precious days for myself, for my art, for my secret rebellion. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange dual existence. By day, I was Olivia Hayes, dedicated accountant and supportive girlfriend to rising advertising executive Marcus Whitman. By night, I was someone else entirely, a woman discovering her voice through color and form, researching art techniques, studying the work of contemporary painters, and preparing for what increasingly felt like a new chapter of my life. The night before my first workshop, I could barely sleep. What if I was terrible? What if the other participants were all experienced artists who would immediately see through my amateur attempts? What if Rafael Diaz himself confirmed what Marcus had said, that I lacked talent, that art wasn't my path? I slipped out of bed at 3 a.m., drawn to my canvases like a moth to flame. In the blue darkness, illuminated only by the streetlights filtering through the blinds, I studied my work with critical eyes. The raw emotion was there, but the technique was undeniably lacking. My proportions were indeed questionable, my understanding of light and shadow rudimentary at best. But there was something else present too, something authentic and compelling beneath the technical flaws, a voice trying to emerge. The next morning, I told Marcus goodbye with a quick kiss, my overnight bag packed with what he believed were conference materials, but actually contained my art supplies, comfortable clothes, and snacks for the long studio days ahead. Have fun with your tax codes, he teased, not looking up from his phone. I will, I replied, meaning it more than he could possibly understand. The workshop was held in a converted warehouse space in the Arts District, an area of town I rarely visited since moving in with Marcus. As I approached the industrial building with its massive windows and exposed brick, my stomach knotted with anxiety and anticipation. Inside, the space was alive with energy. 16 easels arranged in a semicircle, supply tables laden with materials, walls hung with examples of technique and composition. About a dozen other students were already there, arranging their spaces, chatting casually, sipping from travel mugs. I stood frozen near the entrance, suddenly aware of how out of place I felt in my carefully selected, casual outfit that had still cost more than was practical, my hair and makeup done as if this were another networking event rather than an art workshop. First-timer? I turned to find a woman about my age standing beside me, offering a friendly smile. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled into a messy bun, paint already smudged on her overalls despite the early hour. Is it that obvious? I managed, clutching my supply bag like a shield. Only because you look like you're about to bolt, she said with a warm laugh. I'm Daphne, second-time Diaz survivor. Olivia, I replied, relaxing slightly. Survivor? Rafael doesn't believe in coddling. He'll tear your work apart and then show you exactly how to rebuild it better. She gestured toward an empty easel near hers. Come set up next to me. I'll give you the inside scoop on when to take his criticism seriously and when he's just being dramatic. Grateful for the lifeline, I followed her to the easels and began unpacking my supplies. As I arranged my paints and brushes, I felt my accountant persona, the Olivia that Marcus knew, beginning to recede, making space for someone else to emerge. Rafael Diaz arrived exactly at 9 a.m., his entrance marked not by any dramatic flourish, but by a sudden focusing of energy in the room. He was shorter than I expected, with intense eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they landed on. His clothes were paint-splattered but somehow still elegant, and he moved with the confidence of someone completely comfortable in his own expertise. Art, he began without preamble, is not about making pretty pictures. If that's why you're here, leave now and save your money. No one moved. He nodded, satisfied. Good. Art is about truth. Your truth. Discovering it, expressing it, refining it until it resonates not just within you, but within anyone who encounters your work. He walked slowly around the semicircle, making eye contact with each of us. When his gaze met mine, I felt exposed, as if he could see through my carefully constructed facade to the wounded, determined woman beneath. This weekend, he continued, we strip away pretense. We identify the lies you've been telling in your work, and often in your life. We go back to fundamentals, not to master technique, though that will come, but to ensure that when you do have something to say, you have the vocabulary to say it powerfully. My heart raced. It was as if he was speaking directly to me, to my situation, to the precipice I stood upon. Begin with an honest piece, he instructed. Show me who you are today in this moment. 2 hours. No reference materials, no hesitation, no second guessing. Just you and your truth on canvas. And so it began. For 2 hours, I painted with a freedom I hadn't allowed myself in years, perhaps ever. I poured onto the canvas the duality of my existence, the proper, contained Olivia and the emerging artist struggling to break free. I used color to express the conflict, line to demonstrate the tension, texture to communicate the roughness of transition. When Rafael called time, I stepped back from my canvas, suddenly self-conscious. Around me, the other students' works displayed technical skill I couldn't match. Proper understanding of composition I was still developing, yet I felt a strange pride in my raw, imperfect expression. Rafael moved from easel to easel, offering brief, incisive comments, sometimes just a word or two, contrived. Derivative. Promising. Reconsider. I braced myself as he approached my station, expecting confirmation of my technical inadequacies. He studied my canvas for a long moment, head tilted slightly. You're angry, he finally said. Not a question. I swallowed hard. Yes. Good. Anger can be fuel. He pointed to a section where reds and blacks collided violently. This is honest. This matters. Then he gestured to another area where I'd attempted a more controlled, traditional approach. This is you trying to paint how you think you should. Stop that immediately. He moved to the next easel without further comment, leaving me breathless with the simple validation that at least part of what I'd created had value. At lunch, I sat with Daphne and 2 other students, picking at my sandwich while they discussed Rafael's feedback. He barely said anything about my work, complained a young man named Tyler. Just keep digging, whatever that means. It means you're still on the surface, Daphne explained. Rafael wants us to go deeper than technical skill or pretty pictures. He's looking for the stuff that scares you to reveal. The stuff that scares you to reveal, I repeated softly, thinking of the anger Rafael had identified in my work, the truth I was hiding even from myself about my relationship, my future, my capacity for darkness. Exactly, Daphne nodded. So, Olivia, what brings you to an intensive with Rafael? You don't seem like the usual type. Usual type? You know, struggling artist, mid-career crisis, retired creative returner. She smiled to soften her words. You have this corporate energy about you. I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. These were strangers, yet somehow I felt I could be more honest with them than with the man I lived with. My boyfriend thinks art is a waste of my time, I said finally. I'm here to prove him wrong. The table fell silent for a moment. Well, that's a shit reason to make art, Tyler said bluntly. I felt heat rise to my cheeks. Excuse me? Tyler, Daphne admonished, but he continued. No, seriously. Making art to prove someone else wrong? That's giving them way too much power over your creativity. He leaned forward. Make art because you can't not make it. Because it's how you process being alive. Because it's your way of speaking truth. But don't make it for him, even as a fuck you. His words hit me with unexpected force. Was that what I was doing? Creating art as a reaction to Marcus rather than as an authentic expression of myself? I'm not, I began, then stopped. Because maybe Tyler was right. My renewed dedication to art had begun as a response to humiliation, a determination to prove Marcus wrong. But was that enough to sustain me through the inevitable rejections and struggles ahead? Anyway, Daphne said, clearly trying to ease the sudden tension. Raphael says the breakthrough usually happens in week 3, so pace yourself emotionally. The conversation shifted to safer topics, but Tyler's challenge lingered in my mind throughout the afternoon session, which focused on technical fundamentals of composition and value studies. As Raphael moved us through exercises designed to strengthen our basic skills, I found myself questioning my motivations, my goals, even my understanding of what art meant to me. By the end of that first day, I was physically exhausted but mentally electrified. I had 6 more hours the next day, 7 more weekends after that, to discover who I was as an artist, and perhaps as a woman separate from Marcus's expectations. As I packed up my supplies, Raphael approached my station. "Your technique needs work," he said without preamble. "But your voice is trying to speak. Don't silence it with doubts or others' expectations." He handed me a slip of paper. "Additional exercises. Do these at home if you're serious." I took the paper, nodding. "I'm serious. We'll see," he replied, already moving to the next student. I left the warehouse as someone slightly different from the woman who had entered that morning. The transformation was subtle but undeniable, a small crack in the facade I'd maintained for so long, a glimpse of who I might become if I dared. On the drive home, I decided to take a detour. Instead of returning directly to the apartment I shared with Marcus, I found myself parking outside the Cameron Richards Gallery. The same gallery Marcus would be taking me to in a few weeks for his networking event. The current exhibition featured large-scale abstract work by an artist I wasn't familiar with. I wandered through the space, studying not just the art but the environment itself, the lighting, the layout, the subtle ways the gallery presented each piece to its best advantage. I imagined my own work hanging on these pristine walls. A wild fantasy, perhaps, but no longer an impossible one. First time visiting us? A tall man with stylish glasses and an impeccable suit approached, his smile professional but warm. "Yes," I admitted. "Your gallery is beautiful." "Thank you. I'm Cameron Richards." He extended his hand. "Are you an art collector or an artist yourself?" The question caught me off guard. Even after a full day at Raphael's workshop, I hesitated to claim the identity. "I'm an artist," I said, the words feeling strange and powerful on my tongue. "Still developing, but yes, an artist. The best ones are always still developing." He replied with a genuine smile. "Would you like a catalog of our current exhibition? Miguel's work is really breaking new ground in abstract expressionism." I accepted the glossy catalog, thanking him. As I turned to leave, I noticed a small sign near the entrance. "Portfolio Reviews by Appointment, Emerging Artist Program." "Do you really review portfolios from unknown artists?" I asked impulsively. Cameron nodded. "Twice a year formally, though I'm always looking for new voices. It's how I built this gallery, taking chances on artists other galleries overlooked." He reached into his pocket and handed me a business card. "If you're interested, our next review period opens in September. Details are on our website." I slipped the card into my bag, a plan forming in my mind. 4 months. 16 intensive workshop days with Raphael. Countless nights of practice and development. Could I prepare a portfolio worthy of professional review by then? As I drove home, a strange calm settled over me. For the first time since the mockery night, I felt a sense of direction, of purpose beyond reaction to Marcus's dismissal. I wasn't just painting to prove him wrong anymore. I was painting to become the artist I was meant to be, with or without his approval. When I arrived home, Marcus was on the couch watching a basketball game, beer in hand. "How was the boring accounting thing?" he asked, eyes still on the screen. "Surprisingly inspiring," I replied truthfully. He glanced at me then, perhaps hearing something different in my voice. For a moment I thought he might ask more, might show genuine interest in my day. Instead, he patted the couch beside him. "Come watch the game with me." "I've missed you." I sat beside him as requested, letting him pull me against his side, but my mind was elsewhere, in a converted warehouse with 16 easels, in a pristine gallery with white walls waiting for my work, in a future increasingly difficult to envision with the man whose arm now rested heavily across my shoulders. The next 7 weeks unfolded in a carefully orchestrated double life. Weekdays, I was Marcus's girlfriend, efficient, supportive, present but increasingly detached. I attended his work functions, laughed at the right moments during dinners with his colleagues, and maintained the appearance of contentment while inwardly counting the hours until my next workshop session. Weekends, I transformed. Under Raphael's uncompromising guidance, I discovered technical skills I'd never properly developed, conceptual approaches I'd never considered, and most importantly, the authentic voice that had been silenced for too long. Raphael pushed us relentlessly, tearing down our defenses and pretensions, forcing confrontations with our creative weaknesses while nurturing our emerging strengths. Art that matters comes from truth, he reminded us constantly. Find your truth, no matter how uncomfortable, and express it with conviction. My truth, I was discovering, was complex and not entirely flattering. I was angry at Marcus for his dismissal, yes, but also at myself for allowing his judgment to matter so much, for conforming to expectations that diminished me, for losing touch with the passionate, creative woman I'd once been. This anger, channeled through Raphael's technical instruction, produced work of increasing power. My style evolved rapidly, moving from chaotic emotional expression to more controlled but equally authentic visual statements. I experimented with mixed media, incorporating elements of collage using torn pieces of encouraging notes I'd once written to myself, but abandoned when Marcus subtly mocked my self-help nonsense. By week 5, Raphael stopped in front of my easel and studied my piece in silence for a full minute before simply saying, "Now you're painting from your core. Don't retreat from this place." The other students noticed the change too. Daphne whistled appreciatively at my mid-workshop piece, an abstract representation of emotional suffocation using layers of translucent washes punctuated by stark, decisive black lines. "Someone's found their voice," she commented, eyes scanning the canvas thoughtfully. "This is powerful, Olivia." Tyler, who had challenged my motivations that first weekend, nodded in agreement. "You're not painting for your boyfriend anymore," he observed. "This is for you." He was right. Somewhere along the way, proving Marcus wrong had ceased to be my primary motivation. I was painting now because I'd rediscovered the joy and necessity of creative expression, the way it helped me process emotions I'd suppressed for years, the deep satisfaction of translating my inner landscape into visual form. This artistic evolution paralleled subtle but significant changes in my relationship with Marcus. I began to notice patterns I'd previously accepted without question, how he subtly undermined my independence, how he positioned himself as the arbiter of value in our relationship, how his compliments often contained veiled criticisms designed to keep me seeking his approval. "You're quieter lately," he observed one evening as we prepared dinner together, or rather, as I prepared dinner while he leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone. "Everything okay with us?" "Just processing a lot," I said vaguely, focusing on chopping vegetables for the stir-fry. He set down his phone and stepped behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, a gesture that once would have made my heart race but now felt vaguely constrictive. "You know you can tell me anything," he murmured against my hair. Could I? I wondered what would happen if I told him the truth, that I'd been spending my weekends not at accounting conferences but at an art workshop, that I was developing a portfolio for gallery submission, that I was reconsidering not just my artistic path but our relationship itself. The vegetables sizzled as I added them to the hot wok. "I know," I replied, another small lie in the growing collection between us. He seemed satisfied with this response, returning to his phone while I finished cooking. Later that night, as we had sex with the practiced efficiency of a long-term couple, I felt a strange detachment, as if I were observing us from a distance. His hands moved over my body in familiar patterns, seeking the responses he knew how to elicit, but my mind kept drifting to the canvas waiting for me in my secret studio space, to the colors I wanted to explore, to the workshop exercises still to complete before next weekend. Afterward, as he drifted to sleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling and acknowledged a truth I'd been avoiding. I was outgrowing Marcus. Or perhaps more accurately, I was growing back into myself, the self that had begun to disappear when I accepted his limited vision of who I could be. The gallery opening that Marcus had mentioned, his networking opportunity, fell on the Friday before my final workshop weekend. I had almost forgotten about it until he reminded me over breakfast, instructing me once again to wear that black dress he liked. Remember, the Sullivans will be there, and Richard might introduce me to some potential clients," he said, straightening his tie in the hallway mirror. "These art people love to throw money at advertising." "Art people," I repeated, the phrase striking me as unintentionally revealing of how he viewed the creative community, as a monolith useful primarily for business connections rather than as individual artists with unique voices and visions. He didn't notice my tone, too busy checking his calendar app. "We should arrive around 7, make an appearance, network a bit, and then we can head out for a late dinner at Maison. I made reservations for 9. I nodded, already mentally cataloging my limited collection of gallery-appropriate attire. Most of my clothes were now splattered with paint, my weekend workshop wardrobe expanding while my Marcus-approved outfits languished in the back of the closet. That evening, I slipped into the requested black dress, applied makeup with more care than I'd bothered with in weeks, and arranged my hair in the sleek style Marcus preferred. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. This polished, contained woman seemed increasingly distant from the paint-covered artist who emerged each weekend. "You look gorgeous," Marcus approved when I emerged from the bedroom. His eyes traveled appreciatively over the dress that highlighted what he considered my best features. "Perfect." The compliment rang hollow. Perfect for what? For whom? For his purposes, certainly. The ideal accessory for his networking ambitions. I forced a smile and accepted his kiss, tasting the expensive scotch he'd poured himself while waiting. "Ready to be bored by pretentious art?" he joked as we headed for the door. I bit back a sharp reply. "Maybe it'll be interesting." He laughed. "Doubtful. But the connections will be worth it." The Cameron Richards Gallery was transformed from the quiet space I'd visited weeks earlier. Now it buzzed with well-dressed patrons holding wine glasses, the lighting adjusted to create an intimate atmosphere despite the high ceilings and open floor plan. The featured artists' work, large-scale mixed-media pieces exploring themes of isolation and connection, hung on the pristine walls, each piece thoughtfully illuminated. "There's Richard," Marcus murmured, guiding me with a hand at the small of my back toward a distinguished-looking older man, conversing with a small group near the largest installation. "Follow my lead." For the next hour, I smiled and nodded through conversations that skimmed the surface of art appreciation while focusing primarily on business connections, investment potential, and social positioning. Marcus worked the room expertly, dropping just enough comments about the artwork to appear culturally literate while steering discussions toward advertising opportunities and client relationships. I found myself increasingly uncomfortable, both with his superficial engagement with the art and with my own complicity in this performance. When he became deeply engaged in conversation with Richard and a potential client, I excused myself to admire the artwork more closely. Away from Marcus, I moved slowly through the gallery, giving each piece the attention it deserved. The artist, Elena Vasquez, worked with layered materials, paint, fabric, paper, small objects, to create textured landscapes that seemed to contain hidden narratives. Her technical skill was evident, but more compelling was the emotional resonance of her work, the way each piece invited the viewer into a dialogue rather than simply presenting a finished statement. "What do you think of her use of negative space?" I turned to find Cameron Richards beside me, elegant in a charcoal suit that somehow managed to look both formal and artistic. "It creates breathing room for the emotional intensity," I replied honestly. "Without it, the pieces might feel overwhelming. With it, there's a rhythm, a pulse." He nodded approvingly. "Exactly. Most people miss that." He studied me for a moment. "Have we met before? You look familiar." "I visited the gallery a few weeks ago," I admitted. "You gave me information about your portfolio reviews." "Ah, yes," the developing artist, his eyes lit with recognition. "Will you be submitting when we open applications in September?" Before I could respond, Marcus appeared at my side, his hand once again finding the small of my back in a gesture that suddenly felt possessive rather than affectionate. "Cameron, wonderful exhibition," he said smoothly, extending his free hand. "Marcus Whitman, Apex Advertising. I believe you know my client, Richard Sullivan?" Cameron shook his hand professionally, but returned his attention to me. "And you are?" "Olivia Hayes," I said, conscious of Marcus's slight frown at my failure to identify myself as Marcus's girlfriend. "First, Olivia is an accountant at Henderson & Price," Marcus added quickly, as if my professional credentials needed immediate clarification. "And an artist," Cameron said, surprising both of us. His eyes met mine with a question. A moment of choice stretched before me. I could deflect, minimize, accommodate Marcus's narrative as I had for years, or I could claim my truth here in this gallery that represented everything I aspired to. Yes, I said firmly. I am. Marcus laughed, the sound slightly too loud, slightly too dismissive. Liv dabbles sometimes. Just a hobby. I felt something shift inside me, the last support beam of a structure that had been weakening for weeks finally giving way. Actually, I said, my voice steadier than I expected, I've been developing quite seriously. I'm completing an intensive workshop with Rafael Diaz this weekend. The silence that followed was brief but profound. Marcus stared at me, confusion and the beginning of anger registering in his expression. Rafael Diaz? Cameron's eyebrows rose appreciatively. He's notoriously selective about his students. I'm impressed. Rafael Diaz, Marcus repeated slowly. The weekend accounting conferences. That's where Perhaps I could see your work sometime. Cameron interjected smoothly, either oblivious to or deliberately ignoring the tension between us. Rafael has an excellent eye for identifying artists with unique perspectives. I'd like that, I replied, not looking at Marcus, whose hand had tightened almost painfully against my back. Wonderful. Here's my card, my personal contact, not the gallery's main line. He handed me an elegantly embossed card. Call when you feel ready. No pressure. As Cameron moved away to greet other guests, the carefully maintained facade between Marcus and me cracked irreparably. What the hell was that? He hissed, steering me toward a quieter corner of the gallery. Accounting conferences? You've been lying to me for 2 months? Yes, I admitted, no longer seeing the point in further deception. I've been attending art workshops, developing my skills, finding my voice. His face flushed with anger and something else. Hurt, perhaps, or more likely, wounded pride. Why lie about it? Did you think I'd forbid it or something? The question was so lacking in self-awareness that I almost laughed. You already made your opinion of my art perfectly clear, Marcus. The night you mocked my painting, the one I worked on for 6 months after Gran died, you called it childish, amateur, a waste of time. That was one comment about one painting, he protested, though we both knew it had been far more than that. I was just being honest. No, you were being cruel and dismissive and controlling in that subtle way you have, making me feel small for caring about something you don't value. People nearby were beginning to notice our tense exchange. Marcus forced a smile for their benefit, lowering his voice. This is hardly the place to discuss this, Olivia. We can talk at home. I'm not going to Maison, I said, suddenly certain. I'm going back to the apartment to pack some things. I think I need some space. His expression shifted from anger to alarm. You're overreacting. It was just a painting, for God's sake. But it hadn't been just a painting. It had been my passion, my voice, my authentic self, all of which he had casually dismissed because they didn't fit neatly into his vision of who I should be. It's not about the painting, I said quietly. It's about who I become when I'm with you. And I don't like her very much anymore. I handed him the clutch purse he'd given me for Christmas, containing the apartment keys and credit card he'd added me to. I'll get an Uber. Enjoy your networking. As I walked away, I heard him call my name, not angrily now, but with confusion, as if he genuinely couldn't comprehend what was happening. I didn't turn back. For the first time in years, I was moving forward as myself, not as an extension of Marcus Whitman. Outside, the night air felt cleansing against my skin. I ordered an Uber and waited beneath the gallery's modernist awning, aware of a strange lightness spreading through me despite the emotional upheaval of the confrontation. The black dress that had felt like a costume earlier now seemed irrelevant, a relic of a version of myself I was rapidly leaving behind. When the car arrived, I gave the driver Daphne's address rather than the apartment I shared with Marcus. She had offered her spare room, if you ever need a break from that boyfriend. After hearing fragments of my relationship story over our workshop lunches, I hadn't expected to take her up on it so soon, but tonight, returning to the apartment, with or without Marcus there, felt impossible. As the city lights blurred past the window, I fingered Cameron Richards' business card in my pocket. A door opening just as another was closing, not because of Marcus or in spite of him, but for myself. For the artist I was becoming. For the woman I had always been beneath the accommodating exterior. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts and calls from Marcus, which I ignored. Whatever we needed to say to each other would wait for a time when I was stronger, clearer, more fully myself. For now, I needed space to process not just the end of our relationship, but the beginning of my new direction. When we arrived at Daphne's loft in the Arts District, I paid the driver and stood for a moment on the sidewalk, looking up at the converted industrial building with its massive windows glowing warmly against the night sky. Artist housing, chaotic, authentic, alive in a way my carefully decorated apartment with Marcus had never been. I texted Daphne, "That offer of your spare room, is it still open?" I left Marcus. Her reply came almost immediately. "Door code 8294. Second floor, end of hall. Wine is open. Proud of you. Proud of me. Not for success or achievement or conforming to expectations, but for choosing myself. For finding the courage to leave what no longer served me." As I punched in the door code and stepped into the building's freight elevator, I felt a surge of both terror and exhilaration. Everything was uncertain now, where I would live permanently, how I would rebuild my life, whether my art would ever hang in galleries like Cameron's. The only certainty was that I was finally on my own path, following my own compass rather than Marcus's map. And despite the pain and challenges ahead, that knowledge felt like the first clean breath after years of subtle suffocation. The elevator doors opened onto Daphne's floor. I stepped out, moving toward the light at the end of the hallway, toward the next chapter of my story, a story I was now writing for myself. Daphne's loft was everything my shared apartment with Marcus wasn't. Spacious but cluttered, functional rather than fashionable, every surface bearing evidence of a life centered around creative work rather than appearance. Canvases in various stages of completion leaned against walls, shelves overflowed with art books and supplies, and the furniture looked chosen for comfort rather than aesthetic appeal. "Welcome to chaos." She greeted me, taking in my formal attire with raised eyebrows. "You look like you escaped from a gala." "Gallery opening?" I explained, suddenly self-conscious in my black dress and heels. "Marcus's networking event, where I ran into Cameron Richards, mentioned Raphael's workshop, and effectively ended my relationship in the middle of the exhibition." "Damn," Daphne whistled, leading me to a weathered but comfortable couch. "That's quite an exit. Wine?" I nodded gratefully, slipping off my painful heels and accepting the generously poured glass she offered. "I don't even know what I'm doing here. I just couldn't go back to the apartment." "You're staging a jailbreak?" she said matter-of-factly, settling beside me with her own glass. "Breaking out of whatever cage you've been living in? It's messy but necessary." I took a long sip, letting the wine's warmth spread through me. "I don't have a plan. I have nowhere to actually live, no studio space, just some savings and a lot of half-finished canvases. You have tomorrow's workshop," Daphne reminded me. "And a friend with a spare room you can use until you figure things out. And talent, Olivia. Real talent that's finally getting the space to emerge." Her words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "I can't believe I let him convince me that my art wasn't worth pursuing, that I wasn't good enough." "People can only convince us of what we're already afraid might be true," she said gently. "But that's over now. You're reclaiming your voice. That's what matters." We talked late into the night, my phone occasionally buzzing with messages from Marcus that ranged from angry, "You're being ridiculous," to bargaining, "We can talk about your art, I'll support whatever you want to do," to wounded, "I thought we were happy, I don't understand." I read them all but responded to none, uncertain what I could say that wouldn't be either cruel in its honesty or dishonest in its kindness. The truth was that our relationship had been fundamentally unequal in ways I was only now fully recognizing. Marcus hadn't loved me so much as he had loved the version of me that fit neatly into his life plan: supportive, professionally respectable, socially appropriate, and without competing passions or ambitions that might complicate his narrative. "You should get some sleep," Daphne eventually said, showing me to her spare room, a small space that served as both guest room and storage for completed canvases. "Tomorrow's our last session with Raphael. You'll want to be sharp." The final workshop day was surreal. I arrived in borrowed clothes from Daphne, paint-splattered jeans and a soft flannel shirt that felt more authentically me than anything I'd worn in months, with dark circles under my eyes but a strange clarity in my mind. The other students noticed the change immediately. "Holy shit, you finally left him," Tyler observed when I explained my new living situation. "About time." Raphael, typically uninterested in our personal dramas, paused beside my easel during the morning session. "Your energy is different today," he noted, studying not my canvas but my face. "Clearer. I left my boyfriend last night," I explained simply. "He didn't believe in my art. Or in me, really." Raphael nodded as if this were the most natural progression. "Now make work that proves you believe in yourself." That's the only validation that matters. The final project was ambitious, a large-scale piece that synthesized everything we'd learned over the 8-week intensive. As I worked, applying techniques Raphael had taught us for creating depth, managing composition, and expressing emotional truth, I found myself painting what felt like a visual autobiography. The canvas depicted a woman, rendered in semi-abstracted form, emerging from a carefully constructed box, reaching toward a chaotic but vibrant landscape of possibility. When Raphael made his final rounds, he stopped longest at my station. "This," he said after a prolonged silence, "has everything I've been trying to teach you. Technical skill serving emotional truth. Keep going in this direction." High praise from a man who rarely offered it. As we packed up our supplies for the last time, he approached me again, handing me a card. "I'm curating a small group show at the Bowery Gallery next month. 3 pieces, your strongest work. Submit if you're interested." I stared at the card, stunned. Rafael Diaz was not only a respected artist, but an influential curator whose group shows often launched emerging artists into greater visibility. "Thank you," I managed. "I will." "Your ex did you a favor?" Rafael said unexpectedly. "He showed you exactly who and what to leave behind. Now show yourself what you're moving toward." As the workshop concluded and we said our goodbyes, some tearful, others celebratory, I felt a profound shift in my identity. I entered these sessions 2 months ago as Olivia Hayes, accountant and Marcus Whitman's increasingly dissatisfied girlfriend. I was leaving as Olivia Hayes, artist in development, on a path entirely my own. That path began immediately with practical concerns. Over the next week, with Daphne's steadfast support, I found a small studio apartment in the Arts District, a 6th-floor walk-up with good natural light, and a forgiving landlord who appreciated that creative tenants might occasionally pay rent late, but brought valuable energy to the building. I arranged to collect my essential belongings from Marcus's apartment while he was at work, leaving my key and a brief note that said simply, "I hope you find someone who fits your life better than I did. I need to create my own." He continued texting and calling for several weeks, cycling through anger, hurt, attempts at understanding, and finally a resigned acceptance punctuated by occasional passive-aggressive jabs about throwing away 3 years over a hobby. I responded minimally, maintaining boundaries while trying not to be needlessly cruel. Eventually, the communication dwindled to occasional logistical messages about mail or forgotten items. Meanwhile, I was building a new life centered around my art. I took a part-time accounting position at a small nonprofit arts organization, less money than my corporate job, but more flexibility and a work environment that valued creativity. My evenings and weekends were devoted entirely to painting, developing the 3 pieces for Raphael's group show while continuing to explore my emerging style. The work consumed me in the best possible way. Without Marcus's schedule to accommodate, without his subtle discouragement weighing on my confidence, I found myself painting with an intensity and focus I'd never experienced. The raw anger that had fueled my early post-breakup work gradually transformed into something more nuanced, a visual language that expressed not just what I was leaving behind, but what I was moving toward. My color palette expanded from the dark reds and blacks of my initial rebellion to include vibrant blues, hopeful greens, and golden yellows that spoke of possibility. For Raphael's show, I selected 3 pieces that represented this evolution, from confinement to liberation, from rage to reconciliation, not with Marcus, but with myself. The centerpiece was a large canvas titled Emergence that depicted a female figure breaking through layers of transparent constraints, her form becoming more defined and vibrant as she moved toward the viewer. The night of the opening, I stood in the Bowery Gallery wearing not a Marcus-approved black dress, but an electric blue jumpsuit that Daphne had helped me find at a vintage shop, comfortable, distinctive, and entirely my own choice. My work hung alongside 7 other emerging artists, each with our own distinct voice and vision. Raphael moved through the space like a proud but demanding mentor, offering terse introductions to collectors and critics while letting our work speak for itself. "Your pieces are conversing with each other," observed an older woman with sharp eyes and an intimidating knowledge of art history. "There's a narrative progression that's quite compelling." "Thank you," I replied, no longer deflecting compliments as I once would have. "They represent a personal journey as much as an artistic one." "The best work always does," she said approvingly, handing me her card. "I curate for the Hemming Foundation. We should talk when you have a more extensive portfolio. By the end of the evening, 2 of my pieces had sold, one to a private collector and one to a corporate art consultant furnishing a new media company's offices. Raphael, not one for effusive praise, simply nodded and said, "Keep working. This is just the beginning." And it was. Over the next year, I continued developing my style, submitting to shows, building a portfolio, and gradually establishing myself in the local art scene. I wasn't famous by any means. Success in the art world rarely comes quickly or easily, but I was making progress, gaining recognition, and most importantly, doing work that felt authentic and necessary. I thought of Marcus occasionally, wondering if he had found someone new who better fit his vision of an appropriate partner. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he had indeed started dating a marketing executive from a rival firm, someone professionally ambitious in ways he understood and approved of. I wished them well, genuinely hoping he had found what he needed. My anger toward him had gradually dissipated, replaced by a peculiar gratitude for the catalyst his cruelty had provided. Without that mockery, I might never have found the determination to reclaim my artistic voice. 13 months after leaving Marcus, I received an unexpected email from Cameron Richards. "Your submission portfolio impressed everyone at the gallery. Would you be interested in discussing inclusion in our New Voices exhibition this winter? 3 to 5 pieces, your choice of subject matter. This would be a significant opportunity for emerging artist visibility." I read the email twice, my heart racing. The Cameron Richards Gallery was a significant step up from the smaller venues where I'd been showing my work. Their New Voices exhibition was known for identifying promising artists just beginning to make their mark. Many went on to successful careers, museum acquisitions, and critical recognition. I called Daphne immediately. "Cameron Richards wants my work for New Voices." I told her, still processing the news myself. "Holy shit, Liv! That's huge!" Her excitement matched my own. "The universe has a sense of humor, doesn't it? The same gallery where you had your showdown with Marcus." The irony wasn't lost on me. "Full circle," I agreed. "Or maybe spiral, returning to the same point, but at a higher level. Are you going to include any of the pieces inspired by the breakup?" she asked. I considered this. My work had evolved significantly since those early post-Marcus days, becoming less reactionary and more intentional, less about what I was escaping and more about what I was discovering. But those early pieces had an emotional rawness that still resonated. Maybe one, I decided, to acknowledge the journey, but the rest will be newer work. I don't want to be defined by that relationship, even in opposition to it. Over the next 2 months, I worked intensively on my submissions for the New Voices show, pushing myself to create pieces that represented both my technical growth and my philosophical evolution as an artist. The resulting collection included 4 new works exploring themes of identity, transformation, and authentic self-expression, plus 1 older piece, a refined version of the Emergence, painting from Raphael's group show, reworked with greater technical skill but preserving the emotional truth of the original. When the exhibition opened in December, the gallery was packed with collectors, critics, and art enthusiasts. My section of the show received significant attention, with visitors lingering before my canvases, discussing them in thoughtful clusters, occasionally approaching me with questions or compliments. Cameron moved through the space like a proud curator, introducing me to people he thought should know my work, including several serious collectors and a critic from a prominent art magazine. "Your journey as an artist has been remarkable," he commented during a quiet moment. "When we first met, you were just beginning to reclaim your voice. Now look at you." I smiled, remembering that night when I had slipped away from Marcus to explore the gallery alone, dreaming of a future that seemed impossible then, but was materializing now. "Thank you for taking a chance on me. Talent reveals itself," he replied simply. "I just provided the wall space." As the evening progressed, I was engaged in conversation with the magazine critic when a familiar voice behind me caused me to freeze momentarily. "I have to say, these pieces are extraordinary, Marcus." I turned slowly to find him standing there, older by just 18 months but somehow changed in subtle ways. A new haircut, slightly different style, the familiar confidence in his stance but something altered in his expression. "Marcus," I acknowledged, maintaining my composure despite the unexpected encounter. "Thank you." The critic, sensing the tension, excused herself discreetly. "I didn't know you'd be here," Marcus said, glancing around the gallery. though I should have guessed when I saw your name on the exhibition materials. Cameron Richards Gallery. You did it. Yes, I said simply. I did. He studied my central piece, the evolution of emergence, that traced its lineage back to the night I'd left him. Is this about us? It's about me, I corrected gently. About finding my way back to myself. He nodded, looking uncomfortable but determined. You were right, you know. About us. About how I treated your art, treated you. I didn't understand because I didn't want to understand. Your passion threatened me somehow. The admission surprised me. Marcus had never been one for self-reflection or acknowledging his mistakes. What are you doing here tonight? I asked, curious rather than accusatory. I saw the exhibition announcement online. Your name was featured prominently. He hesitated. I wanted to see what you've become. What I missed by not supporting you when I had the chance? There was regret in his voice, but something else too, a genuine appreciation for the work before him. He wasn't here to win me back or to undermine my success, but to witness it, perhaps to make peace with his role in both hindering and inadvertently catalyzing it. Are you happy? I asked, the question emerging before I could consider its implications. Getting there, he replied with unexpected honesty. Dating someone new, learning to be a better partner, trying to listen more. He gestured toward my paintings. Your work is incredible, Olivia. I'm sorry I couldn't see that before. The apology felt sincere, if belated. I found myself nodding, a sense of closure settling over me. Thank you for saying that. I hope things work out with your new relationship. And you? Are you seeing anyone? I shook my head. Not currently. I've been focused on this. I gestured to the exhibition. On becoming the artist I always wanted to be. He smiled then, a genuine smile without the edge of condescension I remembered too well. Well, you've succeeded. These are selling for impressive prices from what I overheard. Art isn't about the price tags, I said automatically, then caught myself. But yes, the validation is nice. An awkward silence fell between us, 18 months of separate lives creating a gulf that casual conversation couldn't bridge. Finally, Marcus extended his hand formally. Congratulations, Olivia. You deserve all of this success. I shook his hand, the familiar touch now strange and distant. Thank you for coming, Marcus. As he walked away, disappearing into the crowd of gallery patrons, I felt a curious lightness. Our encounter hadn't been dramatic or contentious. No shouting, no tears, no rekindled feelings. Just two people who had once known each other intimately, acknowledging a shared history before continuing on their separate paths. Cameron appeared at my elbow with a glass of champagne. Ex-boyfriend? He inquired perceptively. Yes, I confirmed, accepting the glass gratefully. The one who said my art was childish amateur work. Cameron chuckled. I imagine he's reconsidering that assessment now that you're the featured artist in my gallery and 3 of your pieces have sold in the first hour. I sipped my champagne, letting the bubbles dance on my tongue. His opinion stopped mattering a long time ago, but it's nice that he came to see the work. Closure is valuable, Cameron agreed. Though I suspect your greatest satisfaction comes not from proving him wrong, but from proving yourself right. His observation struck me as profoundly true. My journey had begun as a reaction to Marcus's mockery, but it had evolved into something far more meaningful, a reclamation of my authentic self, a commitment to my creative voice regardless of external validation or criticism. The true victory wasn't that Marcus now recognized my talent, but that I had found the courage to pursue it with or without his approval. As the evening continued, collectors approached to discuss my work. A gallery assistant discreetly added, "Sold," markers to 3 more of my pieces, and several people requested my contact information for future commissions. I moved through these interactions with a confidence that would have been unimaginable 18 months earlier when I stood in this same gallery as Marcus's accessory rather than as an artist in my own right. Later, as the crowd thinned and only serious art enthusiasts remained, I found myself standing alone before my central piece, the painting that traced my journey from confinement to liberation. From the perspective of distance and success, I could see both how far I had come and how much further I still wanted to go. My phone vibrated with a text message. Expecting Daphne checking in on the exhibition's success, I was surprised to see Marcus's name on the screen. Your revenge is complete. Famous painter while I can barely get my new girlfriend to commit to dinner plans. Well played. The message contained a touch of his old humor, but without the caustic edge. I smiled, sensing that this was his way of acknowledging both my success and his previous failure to support it. I typed a response but hesitated before sending it, considering the journey that had brought me to this moment. Finally, I pressed send. It was never about revenge, Marcus. It was about becoming who I was always meant to be. I wish you well. Slipping my phone back into my pocket, I took one last look at my painting, at the visual representation of my emergence from the constraints of others' expectations into the freedom of self-defined creation. The woman in the painting looked forward, not back, her gaze fixed on possibilities rather than grievances. And in that moment, standing in the prestigious gallery that had once seemed an impossible dream, surrounded by my work that spoke truths I had almost been too afraid to acknowledge, I felt something profound settle into place, a sense of having come home to myself, of standing firmly in an identity that was entirely my own creation. The road ahead would have its challenges, as all artistic careers do, but I was no longer the woman who had allowed someone else's mockery to silence her voice. I was Olivia Hayes, artist, creator, author of my own story. And that story was just beginning. 2 months after my successful New Voices exhibition, I was still riding the wave of unexpected recognition. 3 prominent collectors had purchased pieces, a respected art blog had featured my work in a Rising Stars article, and most significantly, Cameron had offered me a spot in his gallery's permanent roster, an opportunity that would provide consistent representation, professional guidance, and the stability that most emerging artists only dream of. "This is just the beginning," Cameron told me over coffee in his elegantly sparse office at the gallery. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the space in a way that made even mundane objects seem worthy of artistic consideration. "Your work connects with people on an emotional level that's rare. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I can count on one hand the artists I've represented who had that quality from the start." I wrapped my hands around my mug, still not entirely comfortable with praise of this magnitude. "Thank you for taking a chance on me." "It's not chance, Olivia. It's recognition." He pushed a contract across his minimalist desk. "Standard terms? 2 major exhibitions per year, commission split, gallery exclusivity with exceptions for special projects we discuss in advance." His eyes, sharp and evaluative behind stylish frames, studied my reaction. "Take it home. Have a lawyer look it over if you want." But I believe this partnership could be transformative for both of us. As I left the gallery with the contract tucked safely in my bag, I could barely contain the bubble of joy expanding in my chest. 2 years ago, I had been an accountant with a secret passion, a woman slowly disappearing into the negative space of someone else's expectations. Now, I was on the verge of becoming what I'd hardly dared to dream, a professional artist with gallery representation. I practically floated down the street to the subway, pulling out my phone to call Daphne. My finger hovered over her name when another notification caught my eye. A LinkedIn update from a mutual connection. "Congratulations to Marcus Whitman on his new position at..." My thumb froze above the screen. I hadn't sought out information about Marcus since our encounter at my exhibition, but now curiosity pulled me in. I tapped the notification. He'd left his prestigious advertising firm for a smaller agency, a definite step down in the industry hierarchy. The announcement attempted to frame it positively, excited for new challenges, but anyone familiar with advertising could read between the lines. Something had gone wrong. I slipped my phone back into my pocket without calling Daphne, suddenly unsettled by the complex emotions this news triggered. I didn't wish Marcus ill, not really. Yet I couldn't deny the small, vindictive part of me that felt a flicker of satisfaction. The universe seemed to be balancing its scales, my ascent mirroring his descent. That evening, alone in my studio apartment that doubled as my workspace, I stared at Cameron's contract spread out on my paint-splattered table. The legal language blurred as my mind drifted to Marcus. Why had he left his job? Had the company downsized? Had he made a critical mistake? Or had something shifted within him, as it had within me, leading to a reevaluation of priorities? I shook my head, annoyed at myself for allowing him to occupy so much mental real estate. My focus should be on this contract, on my future, not on the man whose dismissal of my art had once cut so deeply. Yet the synchronicity was difficult to ignore, my life expanding as his seemed to be contracting. The next morning, I signed the contract after having a lawyer friend review it. As I handed the document back to Cameron, I felt a shift in my identity, another layer of amateur falling away, replaced by something more substantial, more legitimate. "Welcome to the Cameron Richards family," he said, his handshake firm. "Now let's talk about your first official exhibition. I'm thinking September, giving you 6 months to develop a cohesive body of new work. The theme is entirely your choice. 6 months to create a collection worthy of a solo exhibition at one of the city's most respected galleries." The opportunity was exhilarating, the pressure terrifying. "I've been exploring themes of transformation," I said, ideas already forming. "The space between who we were and who we're becoming. The shedding of old identities." Cameron nodded approvingly. "Timely and universal, yet deeply personal. Perfect." He made a note in his sleek leather planner. 10 to 12 major pieces plus some smaller supporting works. "We'll need everything ready for photography and catalog preparation by early August." As I left the gallery, contract executed and exhibition scheduled, my phone buzzed with a text from Daphne. "Emergency drinks required. Studio drama. Need to vent. Usual place, 7 p.m.? Our usual place was a dive bar called The Palette, a hangout for local artists attracted by its cheap drinks and unpretentious atmosphere. By the time I arrived that evening, Daphne had secured our favorite corner booth and ordered my standard whiskey sour. "You're glowing," she observed as I slid into the booth. Something happened. I couldn't contain my smile. Cameron Richards offered me representation. Official contract, solo exhibition in September, the whole deal. Holy shit! Daphne's eyes widened, her own studio drama temporarily forgotten. "Liv, that's massive!" She raised her glass in toast. "To Cameron Richards' newest star." We clinked glasses, and I savored both the tart drink and the sweet moment of celebration with the friend who had supported me through the darkest days of my transformation. "I can't quite believe it," I admitted. 2 years ago, I was hiding my painting supplies from Marcus and convinced I had no real talent. At the mention of Marcus, Daphne's expression shifted subtly. "Have you heard? About his job change?" "Yes, I saw it on LinkedIn." She shook her head. "Not just that. Alicia from your old accounting firm is dating someone at his former agency. Apparently Marcus was asked to leave. Something about a presentation gone horribly wrong with a major client." My stomach tightened. "What happened?" From what Alicia heard, he presented campaign concepts that were basically plagiarized from another agency's work. The client had already seen the original ideas in a pitch from the competitor. Daphne took a sip of her beer. "Career suicide in advertising." The information sat heavily between us. Marcus, who had always prided himself on his creative talent in advertising, while simultaneously dismissing my artistic abilities, had resorted to stealing ideas. The irony was almost too perfect. "I shouldn't feel satisfied by this," I said quietly. "It's petty." "It's human," Daphne corrected. "He hurt you deeply, undermined your confidence, made you question your talent and worth. Finding out he's facing professional consequences for lacking the very creativity he claimed you didn't have? That's poetic justice, Liv. Allow yourself to appreciate the symmetry." I nodded, acknowledging the complicated truth in her words. There was indeed a certain cosmic balance to the situation. As I found my authentic creative voice, Marcus had apparently lost his, resorting to plagiarism out of desperation or laziness. "Anyway," Daphne continued, clearly sensing my discomfort with the topic, "let's talk about your exhibition. Have you started planning the pieces?" Grateful for the redirect, I launched into my ideas for the show, describing the conceptual framework and visual language I wanted to develop. As we talked, Marcus receded from my thoughts, replaced by the exciting challenge ahead. For the next 4 months, I lived, breathed, and dreamed my exhibition. I reduced my hours at the non-profit accounting job to part-time, using my savings to supplement my income while I focused primarily on creating the new collection. Days blurred into nights as I worked in a state of flow that I'd never experienced before, challenging, exhausting, but deeply fulfilling. The collection, which I titled Becoming, evolved into an exploration of identity transformation through visual metaphor. Each large-scale canvas represented a stage in the process of shedding an inauthentic self and embracing a more genuine existence. The color palette progressed from muted, constrained tones in the early pieces to vibrant, expansive hues in the later works, mirroring my own journey from suppression to expression. In late July, with the exhibition taking coherent shape, I agreed to meet a friend for lunch at a new restaurant in the financial district. Emma worked at a gallery across town and had been an enthusiastic supporter of my work since seeing it at the New Voices show. As I approached the restaurant, I caught sight of a familiar figure through the window. Marcus, sitting alone at the bar, staring into a half-empty glass. My first instinct was to turn around, find another place to eat, avoid the potential awkwardness of another encounter. But something stopped me. Perhaps curiosity. Perhaps a desire to measure the distance I'd traveled from the woman who had once organized her life around his preferences. I entered the restaurant, spotting Emma at a table near the back. To reach her, I would need to walk past the bar where Marcus sat. Drawing a deep breath, I moved forward. He didn't notice me at first, too absorbed in whatever thoughts had created the deep furrow between his brows. Only when I was directly beside him did he look up, recognition dawning slowly in his eyes. "Olivia?" he said, surprise evident in his voice. "Hi." "Hello, Marcus." I paused, taking in the subtle changes since I'd seen him at my exhibition. His clothes were still expensive, his haircut still precise, but something about him seemed diminished. The confident shine dulled, the assured posture slightly slumped. "You look well," he offered, straightening on his bar stool. "I heard about your gallery contract." "Congratulations." "Thank you." I hesitated, unsure whether to acknowledge what I'd heard about his career troubles. "Are you doing okay?" A flash of something, embarrassment? Bitterness? Crossed his face before he managed a tight smile. "Just navigating some professional transitions. You know how it goes." "I do," I said softly, the words holding more meaning than he might have realized. I had navigated my own transitions, painfully but ultimately successfully. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us until he broke it with an attempt at casual conversation. "Are you meeting someone?" "Yes, a friend from another gallery. She's at that table in the back." I gestured toward Emma, who was watching our interaction with undisguised curiosity. "Right, of course." He nodded, something wistful entering his expression. "You move in art circles now." The observation seemed to highlight the divergence of our paths, my entrance into a world that had once seemed impossibly distant, his exit from the professional sphere he had dominated so confidently. "Well, I should let you get to your lunch," he said, turning back to his drink. "It was good to see you, Olivia." "You too, Marcus." I meant it, surprisingly. Seeing him now, stripped of the power he had once held over my self-perception, I felt neither anger nor satisfaction, just a gentle recognition of our shared humanity and the impermanence of all circumstances, good or difficult. As I continued to my table, Emma raised an eyebrow. "Was that the infamous ex?" "The very one," I confirmed, settling into my chair. "He looks like he's seen better days," she observed, not unkindly. "He's going through some professional challenges," I said, reluctant to elaborate on information I'd received secondhand. "Karma's quite the artist herself, isn't she?" Emma mused. "Creating these perfect symmetrical compositions in life." I thought about this as our lunch progressed, our conversation shifting to upcoming exhibitions and gallery gossip. Was this karma? Marcus had mocked my artistic aspirations while priding himself on his advertising creativity. Now I was preparing for a solo exhibition while he faced professional disgrace for creative plagiarism. The narrative alignment was almost too perfect, too much like the satisfying conclusion of a morality tale. Yet real life rarely unfolds with such narrative convenience. Marcus's current struggles and my success weren't directly connected. He hadn't lost his job because he'd been cruel about my painting. I hadn't secured gallery representation because he'd plagiarized advertising concepts. Our separate trajectories might temporarily create a pleasing pattern of justice served, but they were ultimately independent storylines that had briefly intersected, not a cosmic balancing of accounts. Still, I couldn't deny the psychological satisfaction of the current arrangement. There was something healing about knowing that the man whose judgment had once seemed so important, so defining, was now facing his own crisis of creative legitimacy while I flourished. After lunch, I walked back to my studio, passing the skyscraper that housed Marcus's former advertising firm. I remembered attending holiday parties there, smiling politely as his colleagues discussed campaigns and clients, feeling like an accessory rather than a person with my own passions and ambitions. How desperate I had been for approval in those days. His approval, his colleagues' approval, society's approval of our picture-perfect professional couple dynamic. Now, as I returned to my paint-splattered studio to continue work on my exhibition pieces, I felt a profound gratitude for the journey that had led me here. Not because it had coincided with Marcus's downfall, that was incidental, not essential, but because it had brought me back to myself. The weeks leading up to my exhibition were a blur of final preparations, adjusting compositions, finalizing frames, approving catalog text, conducting interviews with art publications. Cameron was meticulous about every detail, positioning the show not just as a collection of paintings, but as the definitive introduction of a significant new artistic voice. "We're investing in your career trajectory," he explained as we reviewed the exhibition layout. "This isn't just about selling these specific pieces, though we will sell them all, I'm confident. It's about establishing your place in the contemporary art conversation." The pressure was immense but exhilarating. I worked until my hands cramped and my eyes burned, pushed through creative blocks and technical challenges, refined each piece until it communicated exactly what I intended. This wasn't just my first major solo exhibition. It was my formal declaration of artistic identity. 3 days before the opening, as the gallery assistants were hanging the final pieces according to Cameron's precise instructions, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Is this Olivia Hayes?" a woman's voice asked when I answered. "Yes, speaking. This is Clara Jeffries from Artforum magazine. We're doing a feature on emerging artists for our October issue, and your name keeps coming up in conversations with gallery owners and collectors. Would you be available for an interview and studio visit next week after your exhibition opening?" Artforum, one of the most prestigious contemporary art publications in the world. My heart pounded as I managed to respond professionally, scheduling the interview while trying to contain my excitement. When I hung up, I stood motionless in my studio, surrounded by the remnants of the creative process that had consumed me for months: paint tubes, sketches, reference materials, empty coffee cups. This small space had witnessed my transformation from a hesitant, self-doubting amateur to an artist on the verge of significant recognition. I thought of my grandmother then, how she would have beamed with pride to see my work hanging in a respected gallery, to know that art publications wanted to interview me, that collectors were purchasing my paintings. "Your talent isn't for hiding, little spark," she used to tell me. How right she had been, and how close I had come to hiding it forever. The night of the exhibition opening arrived with a surreal quality, like stepping into a dream I'd had repeatedly but never expected to experience while awake. The gallery was transformed, my paintings illuminated perfectly against the pristine walls, their colors more vibrant, their presence more commanding than they had seemed in my studio. Seeing them in this context, I understood what Rafael Diaz had tried to teach us about the dialogue between art and environment, how the right space amplifies a work's impact. Visitors began arriving promptly at 7, the gallery quickly filling with collectors, critics, fellow artists, and art enthusiasts. Cameron moved through the crowd with practiced ease, making introductions, highlighting specific aspects of different pieces, creating connections between my work and the broader contemporary art context. Daphne arrived with several friends from our workshop days, all of them now pursuing their own creative paths with varying degrees of success. "This is surreal," she whispered, hugging me tightly. "Your name in lights, almost literally." She was referring to the elegant sign at the entrance, "Becoming, New Works by Olivia Hayes," in sophisticated typography that somehow managed to communicate both seriousness and creative energy. "I keep expecting to wake up," I admitted. "Well, don't pinch yourself yet. There's someone who wants to meet you." She gestured discreetly toward an elegantly dressed older woman deep in conversation with Cameron. "That's Helena Mercer." My breath caught. Helena Mercer was a legendary collector whose support had launched numerous significant artistic careers over the past 3 decades. Her collection was renowned for its prescient quality. She seemed to identify important artists years before the broader market recognized their value. "Cameron's bringing her over in a minute," Daphne continued. "Just be yourself. She hates artifice." "How do you know?" "She bought one of my pieces last year at a group show," Daphne said with a modest shrug. "Smaller scale than this, but still, Helena Mercer owns my work." I nearly fainted. Before I could properly process this information, Cameron was approaching with Helena beside him. Up close, she was even more imposing, tall and straight-backed despite being well into her 70s, with sharp eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they landed on with rapid precision. "Helena, may I present Olivia Hayes?" Cameron said formally. "Olivia Helena Mercer." Your work has unusual emotional intelligence, Helena said directly, bypassing conventional pleasantries, particularly the transition piece in the center gallery. You've captured that moment of terrifying freedom when one identity is shed, but the new one isn't fully formed yet. Very few artists manage to visualize that liminal space effectively. I was momentarily speechless, struck by her immediate understanding of exactly what I had attempted to convey in that particular painting. "Thank you," I managed. "That's precisely what I was aiming to express." She nodded as if confirming something to herself. "I'm acquiring that piece and the final transformation work. Cameron has already handled the details. I would like to visit your studio sometime, see your process." It wasn't a request so much as a statement of intention. I nodded, still slightly dazed by the interaction. "I'd be honored." "Good. Cameron has my information." With that, she moved on to examine another painting more closely, leaving me stunned in her wake. "Did that just happen?" I whispered to Daphne. "Helena Mercer just bought 2 of your major pieces and wants a studio visit," she confirmed, eyes wide. "Liv, do you have any idea what this means for your career?" I did, theoretically, but the practical implications were still sinking in. Helena Mercer's endorsement wasn't just financially significant. It was a powerful signal to other collectors, galleries, and institutions that my work merited serious attention. The evening continued in a whirlwind of introductions, conversations, and increasingly surreal moments of recognition. Art critics asked thoughtful questions about my influences and intentions. Fellow artists offered genuine congratulations tinged with the particular blend of admiration and envy that characterizes creative communities. 3 more paintings sold within the first 2 hours, red dots appearing beside their exhibition labels like badges of validation. I was in the middle of a conversation with a museum curator when I felt a tap on my shoulder. Turning, I found myself face to face with Allison, Marcus's former colleague, the one whose husband owned the gallery where Marcus and I had had our final confrontation. "Olivia," she said warmly, "Richard and I wanted to congratulate you. Your work is extraordinary." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely pleased to see her. Despite her connection to Marcus, Allison had always been kind, with an authentic interest in art that her husband's gallery had nurtured. "Is Richard here too? Over by your triptych? He's particularly interested in those pieces for our personal collection." She hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "I hope it's not awkward that we came. I know things ended badly with you and Marcus." "Not at all," I assured her. "It's been a long time, and I appreciate your support." She seemed relieved. "Good. Because we've actually been considering approaching Cameron about a potential joint exhibition between our galleries next year. Your work would be a centerpiece." The opportunity she was suggesting, a featured position in a collaborative show between 2 respected galleries, was significant, another step in building the kind of career momentum that could lead to museum acquisitions and institutional recognition. "That sounds fascinating," I said honestly. "I'd love to hear more about the concept when you have it developed." Allison beamed. "Wonderful. We'll set up a proper meeting." She glanced around the crowded gallery. "Your success couldn't happen to a more deserving person, Olivia. I always thought you had something special, even back when—" She trailed off, clearly not wanting to reference Marcus directly. "Thank you," I said again, touched by her sincerity. As Allison moved away to rejoin her husband, I found myself reflecting on the strange circuitous path that had led me here. If Marcus hadn't mocked my painting that night, would I have found the determination to reclaim my artistic voice so forcefully? If we hadn't attended that gallery event where I met Cameron, would I have found my way to gallery representation? If I hadn't left Marcus, would I have created work with the emotional authenticity that was now being recognized and valued? These questions had no definitive answers, but they highlighted a truth I was still learning to accept. Sometimes the worst experiences lead to the best outcomes, not because suffering is inherently productive, but because crisis forces choices that comfort allows us to postpone indefinitely. The opening continued until nearly midnight, the gallery gradually emptying until only a few dedicated art lovers, close friends, and Cameron's staff remained. When the last guests finally departed, Cameron handed me a glass of champagne from a bottle he'd been saving for this moment. 7 paintings sold, including 2 to Helena Mercer, he said, his professionally reserved demeanor giving way to genuine excitement. 3 major press commitments, museum curator interest, and collector wait lists for your next works. Olivia, this wasn't just a successful opening, this was a career-defining moment. We clinked glasses in the now quiet gallery, surrounded by my paintings, the physical manifestations of my journey from creative suppression to artistic liberation. I keep thinking I should pinch myself, I admitted. 2 years ago, I was an accountant who painted in secret because my boyfriend thought it was a waste of time. Cameron's expression softened with understanding. And now you're being hailed as one of the most promising new voices in contemporary art. Life has satisfying symmetry sometimes, doesn't it? I thought of Marcus, wondered if he had heard about my exhibition, if he understood that the woman he had once dismissed as an amateur was now selling paintings for 5 figures and being interviewed by major art publications. But almost as quickly as these thoughts arose, I released them. Marcus's opinion, whether the dismissive judgment of the past or any hypothetical recognition now, had become irrelevant to my artistic identity. My success wasn't meaningful because it proved him wrong. It was meaningful because it proved me right. Right to listen to my inner voice, right to reclaim my passion, right to believe that my creative expression had value. 2 days after the opening, still processing the exhibition's success and preparing for the Art Forum interview, I received an unexpected email from Marcus. The subject line was simple: "Congratulations." I stared at it in my inbox for several minutes before opening it, uncertain what emotions it might trigger. Finally, curiosity overcoming caution, I clicked. "Olivia, a colleague mentioned your exhibition at Cameron Richards Gallery." I looked up the review in the Times. A stunning debut from an artist with extraordinary emotional intelligence and technical promise. I always knew you were capable of greatness, even when I failed to properly support your creative pursuits. The fault was mine, not yours. I won't pretend things haven't been difficult for me professionally lately. You've probably heard rumors. Most of them are true. I made mistakes born of pressure and ego, and I'm facing the consequences. Starting over at a smaller agency has been humbling but necessary. Seeing your success, deserved success based on authentic talent and hard work, has made me reconsider many things about my approach to life and career. I wanted to thank you for that unexpected gift of perspective. I don't expect a response. I just wanted you to know that someone who once doubted you is now in awe of what you've accomplished. Wishing you continued success, Marcus. I read the email twice, surprised by its genuine tone and the apparent self-reflection it conveyed. There was no request for reconciliation, no self-pitying comparison of our divergent fortunes, just an acknowledgement of my achievement and his past failure to support it. Did I believe his newfound humility was genuine? Perhaps. Crisis has a way of stripping away pretense, forcing confrontation with uncomfortable truths. Marcus had built his identity around professional success and social status. Losing both would necessitate a painful reassessment of priorities and values. I considered responding but decided against it, not out of lingering anger or deliberate snubbing, but because we had said everything that needed saying. His email offered closure, and sometimes closure is best honored with silence rather than prolonged conversation. Instead, I turned my attention to the stack of blank canvases waiting in my studio. The success of Becoming had created both opportunity and pressure, expectations from collectors, critics, and the gallery. My next body of work would need to build on the themes I'd established while pushing into new territory, demonstrating growth rather than repetition. The Art Forum interview later that week marked another milestone in my emerging career. The journalist, Clara Jeffries, spent 3 hours in my studio asking thoughtful questions about my process, influences, and conceptual framework while examining both finished pieces and works in progress. "Your trajectory has been unusually rapid," she noted as our conversation drew to a close. "Less than 2 years from leaving your accounting career to a sold-out exhibition at Cameron Richards Gallery. How do you make sense of that acceleration?" I considered the question carefully. I think I was painting in my head for years before I allowed myself to paint on canvas. All that suppressed creative energy was building, finding its form even when I couldn't acknowledge it. When I finally gave myself permission to create authentically, it wasn't really a beginning but a continuation of work that had been happening internally for a long time. Clara nodded, jotting notes. "And what role did your personal life play in this artistic emergence?" "I understand there was a significant relationship that ended around the time you committed to art." The question was direct but not invasive. Clara had done her research, probably through conversations with people adjacent to the art world who knew fragments of my story. "There was," I acknowledged. A 3-year relationship with someone who didn't see value in my creative expression. Leaving that relationship was part of reclaiming my artistic voice, but it was a symptom rather than the cause of my transformation. I was changing, reconnecting with essential aspects of myself that had been suppressed. The relationship couldn't accommodate that growth. Would you say your work is about that experience? A visual processing of that particular heartbreak or conflict? My early work drew emotional fuel from that experience, I said thoughtfully. But it quickly evolved beyond any specific relationship to explore universal themes of identity, transformation, and authentic self-expression. Art that remains fixated on a single personal grievance becomes narrow. I wanted to create work that used my specific experience to access more universal emotional truths. Clara smiled appreciatively. That evolution is evident in your current exhibition. The personal has become transpersonal without losing its emotional specificity. As she packed up her recording equipment and notes, Clara mentioned that the article would appear in the October issue, with the possibility of featuring one of my paintings on the section cover. After she left, I stood in my studio contemplating the strange new reality I inhabited, a reality where major art publications interviewed me about my creative process, where collectors purchased my work for significant sums, where gallery owners discussed my career trajectory as something with meaningful momentum. 2 years ago, Marcus's mockery of my painting had felt like a devastating judgment, a confirmation of my worst fears about my artistic abilities. Now, that moment had been transformed in my understanding, not diminished in its cruelty, but recognized as a catalyst that forced me to decide whether I would accept his assessment or fight to establish my own. The following weeks brought continued ripple effects from the exhibition's success. 2 museums expressed interest in acquiring pieces for their contemporary collections. An arts foundation invited me to apply for a prestigious residency program. A curator from Paris emailed about including my work in an international survey of emerging painters addressing themes of identity and transformation. I accepted these opportunities with a blend of gratitude and determination, aware that initial success in the art world is often more precarious than it appears. For every celebrated new artist, dozens fade back into obscurity when their work fails to evolve or the market's attention shifts. Sustaining a meaningful artistic career would require continued growth, risk-taking, and authentic engagement with my creative voice. This awareness kept me grounded as external validation accumulated. I maintained my small studio rather than upgrading to a more impressive space, continued friendships with artists at various career stages rather than socializing exclusively in rarefied art world circles, and most importantly, protected my creative process from the distorting influences of market considerations or critical expectations. 3 months after my exhibition, I was working late in my studio when Daphne called, her voice charged with unusual excitement. "Turn on Channel 8 right now," she instructed without preamble. "Why? What's happening?" I asked, reaching for the small television I kept mainly for background noise during long painting sessions. "Just do it. Trust me." I switched on the TV and found myself looking at a familiar face, Marcus, sitting across from an interviewer on what appeared to be a local culture program. My finger hovered over the volume button, hesitation and curiosity battling briefly before the latter won. "The humbling experience," Marcus was saying, his expression more vulnerable than I'd ever seen it during our relationship. "When you've built your entire identity around professional success and then face public failure, it forces a kind of reckoning. Your agency dismissed you after allegations of creative plagiarism," the interviewer stated directly. "That must have been devastating for someone in a creative profession." Marcus nodded, accepting the blunt framing without defensiveness. "It was, and deserved. I took shortcuts under pressure, used concepts that weren't mine, and violated the fundamental ethics of creative work. The consequences were appropriate. Yet here you are discussing it openly. Why? Because I'm creating a mentorship program for young advertising professionals focused on creative integrity and ethical practice." He leaned forward slightly, animated by evident conviction. "My failure can be instructive. We rarely discuss how pressure, competition, and ego lead to ethical compromises in creative industries. I want to change that conversation." I watched, astonished by this version of Marcus, reflective, humble, seemingly genuine in his desire to transform personal failure into something constructive. This was not the man I had known, who deflected criticism and maintained a carefully curated image of effortless success. This program seems like a significant departure from your previous approach to the advertising world, the interviewer observed. What prompted such a fundamental shift in perspective? Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Several things. The professional consequences, obviously, but also watching someone I once dismissed as creatively unserious develop into a remarkably successful artist while maintaining complete integrity in her work. It highlighted the contrast between genuine creative expression and the hollow performance I'd been engaging in. My breath caught. He was talking about me, not by name but unmistakably. I raised the volume slightly. Sometimes, Marcus continued, we need to hit bottom professionally to recognize what actually matters. For me, that meant acknowledging that I had valued external validation and status over authentic creative contribution. The mentorship program is my attempt to help others avoid that particular dead end. The interview continued, detailing the structure of the program and Marcus's partnership with an advertising ethics institute, but I was still processing his indirect reference to me and the impact he claimed my artistic development had on his own reckoning. Did you hear that? Daphne asked when I called her back after the segment ended. He basically credited your success with his ethical awakening. Should I be disgusted or impressed? I'm not sure, I admitted, still sorting through my complex reaction. It seemed genuine, but with Marcus it's hard to tell performance from authenticity. True. But public admission of plagiarism and failure isn't exactly on brand for the Marcus you described. She paused. Maybe people really do change when their narratives collapse around them. The possibility lingered with me long after we hung up. Could Marcus truly have experienced a fundamental shift in values? Was his new ethical mission sincere, or simply a clever rebranding strategy after professional disgrace? More importantly, why did I still care? The answer came to me gradually as I worked through the night on a new painting, one that explored the concept of forgiveness not as absolution granted to another, but as the release of emotional investment in both grievance and vindication. I cared because Marcus had once mattered deeply to me, because his approval had once seemed essential, because the pain of his dismissal had shaped significant aspects of my artistic emergence. But that connection was part of my past now, not my present or future. Whatever transformation Marcus was undergoing, whether genuine redemption or sophisticated image rehabilitation, it belonged to his story, not mine. My own journey had carried me to a place where his opinion, his regret, even his potential growth existed at the periphery of my life rather than at its center. This realization brought an unexpected sense of peace. The narrative of revenge, of success as vindication against someone who had doubted me, had served its purpose in my early artistic development, providing emotional fuel when my confidence wavered. But I had outgrown that framework. My art now drew from deeper, more complex emotional wellsprings than the desire to prove a former lover wrong. 6 months after my debut exhibition, I received an unexpected invitation. A community art center was establishing a scholarship program for young artists from underprivileged backgrounds, and they wanted me to serve as a mentor to the inaugural recipients. The timing was challenging, as I was preparing for my second exhibition at Cameron Richards Gallery, but something about the opportunity resonated deeply. These young artists would be facing what I had faced: doubt, practical obstacles, the subtle and not-so-subtle messages that art was an impractical distraction rather than a legitimate path. I could offer not just technical guidance, but the emotional support I had found so essential during my own artistic emergence. I accepted immediately, rearranging my schedule to accommodate weekly sessions with 3 talented teenagers whose circumstances had limited their access to artistic development but not their creative fire. Working with them, witnessing their struggles and breakthroughs, their moments of doubt and flashes of brilliance, provided perspective on my own journey and the larger purpose of creative expression. My dad says art won't pay the bills. 16-year-old Zara confided during one session, her skillful hands pausing over a promising portrait. He wants me to study business or healthcare. I recognized the conflict in her eyes, the same one I had faced, torn between practical considerations and creative calling. My grandmother used to tell me that art isn't about paying bills. I told her, it's about paying attention to the world, to your inner life, to the connections between things most people miss. The bills matter, yes, but so does your voice. Did your family support your art? she asked. My grandmother did. Others were more skeptical. And I had a partner who actively discouraged it, I admitted. He thought it was a waste of time better spent on practical career advancement. Zara's eyes widened. But you're successful now. You have gallery shows and everything? Yes. But even if I weren't selling paintings or showing in galleries, the art would still matter. It would still be how I make sense of being alive. I gestured toward her portrait. Just like this matters, regardless of whether it ever hangs in a museum. She nodded slowly, absorbing this perspective. So we make art because we have to, not because someone else values it. Exactly. The external validation might come, or it might not. The creative necessity remains either way. As I spoke these words to Zara, I realized how fully I had integrated this truth, not just intellectually, but emotionally. The journey from seeking approval to creating from internal necessity had been long and sometimes painful, but it had brought me to an authentic relationship with my artistic voice that no external circumstance could diminish. My second exhibition at Cameron Richards Gallery, titled Thresholds, opened almost exactly 1 year after Becoming. Where the first show had explored transformation as process, this collection examined the specific moments of passage between states of being, the precise point where one reality gives way to another, where decision crystallizes into action, where potential resolves into actuality. The exhibition generated even more attention than my debut, with international press coverage, collectors traveling specifically to attend the opening, and museum curators expressing serious interest in acquiring pieces for their permanent collections. My work was now commanding prices that would have seemed inconceivable 2 years earlier, and Cameron was fielding invitations for international exhibitions and collaborations. The opening night crowd was larger and more distinguished than even Cameron had anticipated, requiring the gallery to limit entry after the first hour as the space reached capacity. I moved through the elegant throng in a state of controlled amazement, still adjusting to this level of recognition while trying to remain present and authentic in each interaction. Near the end of the evening, as the crowd began to thin, I noticed a familiar figure examining one of my largest pieces, a complex mixed-media work titled Inflection Point, that explored the moment when accumulating small changes suddenly produce fundamental transformation. Marcus. He stood alone, hands clasped behind his back, studying the painting with evident concentration. He looked different. Thinner, his formerly perfect haircut grown out slightly, his designer suit replaced by more casual but still elegant attire. There was something altered in his posture, too, a loosening of the rigid self-presentation I remembered. I considered avoiding him, letting him view the exhibition without the complication of a direct encounter. But curiosity and a strange sense of completion drew me toward him instead. "What do you think?" I asked quietly, stopping beside him. He turned, a flash of surprise crossing his features before settling into a gentle smile. "It's extraordinary, Olivia. The layering creates this sense of seeing multiple moments simultaneously, the before, during, and after of a critical change." His observation was surprisingly insightful, capturing precisely what I had attempted to convey in the piece. "Thank you," I said simply. "I wasn't sure about coming tonight," he admitted. "I didn't want to intrude on your moment, but I've been following your work, and this exhibition sounded too important to miss." I studied him, searching for the calculated charm that had once characterized our interactions. Instead, I found something I hadn't expected: sincerity, and a certain hard-won humility that matched what I'd observed in his television interview. "I'm glad you came," I said, surprising myself with the truth of the statement. "Your mentorship program sounds meaningful. Is it going well?" He nodded, seeming touched that I knew about it. "Better than expected. We're working with 3 agencies now and a major advertising school. Turns out there's significant demand for guidance on maintaining creative integrity under institutional pressure." "That doesn't surprise me," I replied. "Those pressures are real in any creative field." "Including fine art?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Absolutely. Different specifics, same fundamental challenges. Creating from authentic impulse rather than market calculation. Resisting the temptation to repeat past successes instead of taking new risks." I gestured toward the crowded gallery. "Success brings its own pressures to conform to expectations. How do you manage that?" The question was so earnest, so clearly born of his own struggles with these issues, that I found myself answering with complete honesty. by remembering why I make art in the first place, not for validation or market value, but because it's how I process being alive. When I stay connected to that purpose, the external pressures have less power. Marcus was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. I never really understood that when we were together, the necessity of creative expression. I saw art as a product rather than a process, a means to recognition rather than a form of sense-making. He shook his head slightly. I missed something essential about you because of that limitation in my perspective. The acknowledgement was unexpected and clearly difficult for him to articulate. The Marcus I had known rarely admitted to fundamental misunderstandings or conceptual limitations. We often miss what we're not ready to see, I offered, finding I had no desire to punish him for past dismissals. I wasn't fully aligned with my own creative truth then either. He nodded, a flash of relief crossing his features at my lack of recrimination. Your work has taught me more than you know, Olivia. Not just about art, but about integrity, authentic expression, the courage to create from internal necessity rather than external expectation. He gestured toward the painting before us. This piece captures exactly the threshold I'm trying to cross in my own work, the point where external validation ceases to be the primary motivation and is replaced by a deeper purpose. The conversation had taken on a quality I couldn't have imagined 2 years earlier, a genuine exchange between two people who had once hurt each other but were now engaging from a place of mutual respect and shared understanding of creative challenges. I should let you get back to your guests, Marcus said, glancing around at the remaining attendees, several of whom were clearly waiting for an opportunity to speak with me. Congratulations again on a remarkable exhibition. Thank you for coming, I replied. And for what you said about my work. It means something, knowing that it resonates beyond my original intention. He smiled. Not the practiced, perfect smile I remembered from our relationship, but something more genuine in its slight asymmetry. That's the mark of important art, isn't it? It takes on meanings beyond what the artist initially envisioned. As he turned to leave, I felt a curious sense of completion, not the vindictive satisfaction I might once have imagined when fantasizing about Marcus witnessing my success, but a peaceful recognition that our story had found its proper resolution. We had both been transformed by the end of our relationship, me into the artist I was meant to be, him into someone more reflective and authentic than the man I had known. Later that night, after the last guests had departed and Cameron had locked the gallery, I lingered alone among my paintings. In the quiet, surrounded by physical manifestations of my creative journey, I reflected on the strange, circuitous path that had brought me here. 2 years ago, Marcus's mockery of my painting had felt like the end of something, of my artistic aspirations, of my belief in my creative voice, perhaps even of my authentic self. Instead, that painful moment had become a beginning, the catalyst for a transformation that had returned me to myself and launched me into a life I had hardly dared to imagine. The revenge fantasy that had briefly fueled my early determination, of proving Marcus wrong, of achieving the success he had deemed impossible, had long since been replaced by purer, creative motivations. Yet there was undeniable poetic justice in our reversed positions. Marcus humbled by professional disgrace, learning painful lessons about creative integrity, while I ascended in a field he had dismissed as an impractical hobby. But the true victory wasn't that Marcus now admired the art he had once mocked. It was that his opinion, whether dismissive or admiring, no longer defined my relationship to my creative work. I had found the courage to value my own voice above external judgment, to create from internal necessity rather than for external validation. As I moved through the darkened gallery one last time before leaving, I paused before Inflection Point, the painting Marcus had been studying, the visualization of that critical moment when accumulated small changes suddenly manifest as fundamental transformation. The piece contained elements that subtly referenced my journey, fragments of accounting ledgers embedded in the lower layers, paint in the precise shade of red I had blushed when Marcus mocked my work, brushstrokes that echoed the first painting I created after leaving him. But it wasn't about Marcus or even about our relationship. It was about the universal experience of transformation, the terrifying, exhilarating moment when we step fully into a new way of being, when we claim our authentic voice despite all the forces that would silence it. In that quiet moment, surrounded by my work in one of the city's most respected galleries, I felt a profound gratitude for the entire journey. Not just the success and recognition, but the pain and struggle that had preceded them. Marcus's mockery, which had once seemed so destructive, had ultimately helped free me from my own self-doubt and hesitation. When my phone buzzed with a text, I expected it to be from Cameron, checking that I had locked the gallery properly. Instead, it was from an unknown number. Your exhibition was transformative. You've become the artist you were always meant to be. I'm sorry I couldn't see it sooner. Wishing you continued success on your remarkable journey. M. I read the message twice, recognizing the closure it offered, not just for Marcus, but for me. The circle was complete. The revenge narrative that had briefly motivated my early work had evolved into something far more meaningful: mutual recognition of growth, acknowledgement of past mistakes, appreciation of present achievements. I didn't respond to the text. Nothing more needed to be said between us. Instead, I slipped my phone back into my pocket and left the gallery, stepping out into the crisp night air with a sense of liberation that went beyond professional success or personal vindication. My boyfriend had indeed mocked my art. I had indeed become a successful painter while he faced professional setbacks. But the true victory wasn't in the reversal of fortunes or in proving him wrong. It was in the artist and woman I had become in the process, someone who created not for approval or revenge, but from authentic necessity, someone whose value was self-determined rather than externally conferred, someone whose voice had finally found its true expression. As I walked home through the vibrant city streets, ideas for new paintings already forming in my mind, I knew that whatever came next, further success or inevitable challenges, I would face it as my most authentic self, creating from the core of my being rather than from the fear of others' judgment. That was the real masterpiece, not any painting hanging on a gallery wall, but the life I was now creating, one brushstroke at a time.